Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. Okay. So hello again. My name is Isabel Acevedo. I am the manager of community innovation here at the Danforth Center. I hope you enjoy your tour. And I know my group had a lot of great questions, and I hope that you bring some of that into the room today. It's intended to be a very dynamic workshop. We have a great panel that will help us set it up for us, but we're really looking at you to help us bring it to life. During the tour, you got a glimpse of our native prairie, and that prairie was very intentionally built about 6 years ago to reflect our core value of sustainability. I talked to my group about how it also serves as a living lab and an inspiration for scientists, and soon I'll hold a plaque to honor the Osage people of past, present, and future. Someone also asked me in my group if we work with Indigenous peoples here at the Danforth Center, and the honest answer is not a lot, not really. We're very early on that journey here. And as far as I am aware, today is the first time that we're gonna really start an event by reading our land acknowledgement. So I'll go ahead and share that with you. The Danforth Center recognizes Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land. The Danforth Center acknowledges that it is located on the ancestral and unceded homeland of the Osage people who were removed unjustly. By recognizing the Osage people and their traditional homeland, we seek to express gratitude for their enduring stewardship of the land. We pay honor and respect to the Osage ancestors of past and present by committing to build a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So this is not advancing, but I had a slide with it. It's not advancing for me up here. Sorry. Just so you get an idea of what to expect today here, we're gonna start with a panel. Like I said, they will help us sit at our problem here today, and we're really seeking to answer two main questions. What does a climate-ready workforce look like, and how do we prepare and build pathways for new audiences to join our workforce? Again, very interactive. There's Post-its and markers in front of you. It's my kids' school. We have Post-its and markers in front of you. Use them as you hear the conversation. Take notes of maybe a memorable quote, follow-up questions. We will have hopefully some time for questions, but we're running a little behind. If you do have questions or comments when we have time, please come to the microphone. This conversation is the panel will be recorded just so that we can keep record of our conversation and the progress we're making here today. So please come to the microphone so that our team can record your sound. That being said, I'm gonna quickly introduce my friend and colleague, Justin Raimundo. He is the Director of Regional Workforce Strategy for BioSTL. And what that means is that he facilitates inclusive and equitable talent development for the bioscience industry for the St. Louis region. And I couldn't really think of a better person to help us lead us in our discussion today. So thank you.
Welcome my fellow panelists to come on to the panelists I'm moderating to the floor here, and we can get started. But while we're assembling, I just want to say thank you to the Danforth Center for hosting us and for all the work that the Midwest Climate Collaborative is doing to advance sustainability and climate smart, particularly agriculture. Across the Midwest. As Isabel mentioned, we're here to talk about what I talk about daily. So my goal as the director of the regional workforce strategy for the sector I work with partners, academic institutions, corporations, startups, training providers, community organizations to deliver on a singular promise that St. Louis's challenge is their region's most important and critical asset and strength. It is anchored by a world-class, inclusive, and equitable ag tech, biotech, and healthcare workforce. Some of my colleagues have joined me today. We will actually facilitate a conversation, as Isabel mentioned, later in the, oh, thank you. No, you're fine. I just assumed that I could shout. But here, this is better. And I forgot completely that you just said. So we'll start over. Is that I'm Justin. I do workforce. My colleagues are here to help facilitate a conversation, leading you through some of the very same questions that we ask employers, academic institutions, community organizations, to help us collectively plan as a region our workforce strategy, programs, partnerships, and activities that deliver on that promise of ensuring that St. Louis has a really strong ag tech workforce. As many of you know, this is a world-class concentration of scientific and other types of talent in the plant sciences. And so we are really excited to have this conversation. As we noted earlier, first, we'll frame our collective conversation. I'm joined by partners in this work representing perspectives across the Midwest. We'll work together and lean on the wisdom of the room, but particularly these experts right next to me, to answer what does a climate-ready workforce look like, and how do we prepare and build pathways for new audiences to join this workforce. So first, I'm just going to ask all of my friends over here to just introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So do you want to get, how about you, Michael?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Michael Woods. I serve as the division manager for the Illinois Department of Agriculture. I specifically oversee the Bureau of Land and Water Resources and the Bureau of Environmental Programs for the state of Illinois.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Strom, and I'm the managing director of the Illinois Agri-Food Alliance. We are a statewide consortium of stakeholders all across the food and ag ecosystem that are working towards addressing complex challenges, of which workforce is one of the underlying challenges.
Hi, and I'm Mary Fernandez, and I'm a president and co-founder of a company called Solus Agrosciences that's based out of St. Louis, right across the street. And we do cutting edge research for other companies in the ag tech sector.
Hello, my name is Ash Cass. I work here at the Danforth Center in our Education, Research, and Outreach Lab. And specifically, my job is to help push out activities and curriculum to help local schools and communities get more hands-on experience with agriculture and plant science.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be joined really cross-sectorally from individuals working from the public sector, folks that are representing startups and innovation in the private sector, to those of us that are thinking about what this work looks like on the ground to engage more new audiences. But before we dive into some specific questions, I'd love it if Tyler, you could first help us understand what's the problem? Like, why are we all here? Why is this conversation important? And then how are you connecting education with a complex and expansive system that is sort of the agri-food chain?
Sounds good. I actually have a few slides.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna
please.
take stage at the podium here, and I don't know if you want to be there, or if you want to see slides, or if you want to come back around. But I do have the daunting task of trying to set the stage a little bit and kind of broaden our collective horizon in thinking about workforce and its connection at the intersection of food and agriculture and climate. And I'd actually kind of just, I'm interested, how many of you in the audience are connected to food and agriculture? Wow, quite a few hands. That's awesome. How many of you connected to workforce development, higher education, training? Excellent. So this is going to be a great, I think a great event. Okay, so I just want to set the stage a little bit here, and I don't have a visual here, so I'm going to step over this way a little bit. Just to kind of set the historical positioning of as we think about food and agriculture. And the timeline here really kind of starts at 1950, really looking at the expansion of our agri-food systems in a very dynamic way. a lot of concentration about creating a very robust, efficiently designed, affordable food system, a lot of concentration on 4 key commodities. If we look here in the Midwest, corn, soy, wheat. And obviously a lot of that was predicated on this idea that we need to feed a growing global population. And as you see, the nuclear or whatever plant there, kind of symbolizing the fact that it's an industry that has been really heavily fossil fuel dependent. We range anywhere to 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions when we look collectively across the food and ag ecosystem. But then we're here at this pivot point in the 2020s and the timeline out to 2100. And you see here some lovely imagery of different types of ideas of what food and agriculture is going to become and where we're concentrating focus as we reach this point of increasing temperature and different variable climatic conditions that are going to be impacting our ability to produce and make and transform food, as well as a rise in CO2. And we're thinking about things like what we saw here at Danforth, right? The plant in the bottle, really symbolizing the fact that plant science, our crop breeding, our genetics is going to play an important role. We're looking at other genetics in food crops. We're talking about automation and solar sensory technology, precision agriculture. We're talking about different types of integrated landscapes, the trees here, think of perennial shrubs, perennial grains, our water system here, it's all interconnected. And we're really thinking about this pivotal moment of transforming our food and ag ecosystem. So just some kind of key top level points. Again, the agri-food system, we know it's a significant contributor to climate, and it's also going to face considerable acute and chronic pressures. But there is growing evidence that we're going to be able to feed that growing population and in a very adequately nutritious way through new types of climate smart, sustainable agricultural practices and technologies. And the purpose of this discussion is we need to attract and train, as well as retain that climate smart workforce. It's going to be critical to being able to mitigate and adapt to these changing pressures. And we strongly believe here, and I think we're very appropriately situated here in the heart of the Midwest in St. Louis, that the U.S. Midwest is going to play an outsized role in cultivating that talent. Just a couple of definitional terms when you think about food and agriculture. I don't need to belabor this too much, but agriculture, very simply, the cultivation of plants, animals, fungi to produce feed, fuel, energy, what have you. But then when we think about the food system, we're really thinking about an integrated ecosystem. It's very complex. It's got economic factors, social, ecological factors, and it's really driven by a robust and diverse set of system stakeholders, actors that are all driving towards different types of centralized goals or missions. We've heard here at Danforth the focus on meeting the human condition and helping through nutrition as that central goal. And this is supported by our core, kind of what you think of the value chain or the supply chain of agriculture, the simple production, distribution, processing, so on and so forth, all the way to the consumption. And then there's variable inputs supporting that. Knowledge inputs, financial inputs, all the types of service inputs, but certainly the labor inputs. And I put labor and knowledge almost in the similar type of camp there. And then obviously our natural ecosystem supporting our ability to produce food in the first place. When we just kind of look broadly at the U.S. Midwest and the relationship to jobs, globally, there's 3 billion people connected into food and agriculture. The reality of that is most of that is in subsistence type of agriculture. If we look at the US, 43 million connected to this broader food system, food agriculture ecosystem, and the Midwest has about a quarter of that, and really spread all throughout. So there's a lot of people in that workforce. And then just to kind of reflect on what our system here in the Midwest really looks like and is conducive to, again, going back to the 1950s, we're really good at growing very kind of centralized commodity mono crops, corn, soy, wheat. We have some extent of wheat up in the Upper Peninsula area, some dairy happening as well. There's pockets of kind of fruit, vegetable specialty crops happening, but really it's large swaths. As you drove here or flew here to St. Louis, it's obvious. It's large swaths of land to principal commodities. However, the landscape is rapidly changing, and we're seeing this on a number of fronts. I mentioned sort of this idea of digitization of food and agriculture, automation, precision agriculture. We're having new scientific discoveries, product innovation. Again, Danforth here symbolizing a lot of that. We're having shifting consumer behaviors, new types of secondary products hitting this system. You think about alternative proteins and where that's come in the last few years. And there's a lot of other macro level trends that are impacting this shift. We look at that growing population again, the fact that we have a rising urbanization and migration happening around the world. Climate is just one of the scenarios, but obviously it's a major impact on the system. And we're seeing this call to attention of a food system transformation all over the world. Some major organizations, entities here, United Nations, Food Ag Organization, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, CGIAR, a lot of these global institutions that are all pointing us to the same thing, that we need to redesign our food system in a more sustainable, healthier, more nutritious way to be able to meet a lot of these macro level landscape trends that are going to be impacting the food system. I took this slide, this little cutout snipped from the Illinois assessment of impacts of climate change. And they have a section on food and agriculture. This was released by the Nature Conservancy in 2021, just kind of highlighting broadly and an Illinois focus, but this is representative across the Midwest of some pressure areas related to climate. You know, they focus on corn and soy. They talk about weed, pests, and diseases, soil health quality, livestock, specialty crops. And I just took this line and I thought, you know, so what are sort of some of the jobs and careers that are connected at a landscape level to these types of future needs that are going to impact our system from a climate level? Corn and soy, they're talking about needing new types of seed technology. They're talking about management adaptations. They're talking about the extreme presence of drought and heat and that fact that farmers may need to switch crops. You know, we need plant geneticists that are going to be able to derive those new types of seed genetics. We need horticulture specialists that can work with farmers to help them utilize new types of crop technology on the farm. Weed, pest, disease, we heard it on our tour today, the increased pressure of fungal pressures, microbial pressures. There's going to be need for entomologists that are going to be able to understand the shifts in pest pressures. We need applicator technicians that are going to be able to, again, work with producers on certain types of applications needed on the farm. The list goes on, and the point of this is that when we think about careers and jobs as it connects to the food and ag system, all of these individuals, these types of roles are going to have some level of understanding and connection to the climate, to the environment, and supporting a future food system. And then just kind of broadly highlighting some areas of food system transformation. It's happening all over in a lot of different areas. I think there's a lot of exciting future development in the space of food and agriculture. We're talking a lot about climate smart conservation practices, a lot of that infused by the swaths of money coming from USDA and Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of concentration there. But we're also focusing on other spaces, alternative proteins, vertical and urban ag intensification, perennial grains. Again, we heard that here today. Regionalization and the diversification of our food system is an important one, but the list goes on, and there's a lot of different areas and touch points as it's going to relate to food and ag careers. Then I kind of want to just end with a little bit about what we're doing as an organization at ALAFA. We see a need to create more awareness and connectivity to the breadth of career opportunities that connect to food and agriculture among the individuals that just aren't thinking about these opportunities or have that sort of general lack of awareness, or maybe a misperception about what it means to work in food and ag today. It's a rapidly changing ecosystem, and there's a wealth of opportunities. So we're actually going to be launching a platform here in March. It's a virtual platform to help bring industry professionals into classrooms to talk about careers and spark that interest in individuals, in students. And one of our partners is here, Jean Dittmar, with Facilitating Coordination in Ag Education. We have Chanel Rainey Jacob, who is our new careers coordinator. So we look forward to a conversation. We're focused a lot on the K through 12 level, but as we're going to hear from other panelists, there's efforts needed all across the education awareness landscape. So I'm going to end there.
As we come back together, first, thank you, Tyler, for, I gave you a pretty big task of saying, like, what's the big problem? Growing population, certainly needing to fuel the world in a more sustainable and healthy way. Something a lot of us are talking about regularly. So thank you for putting that together in a really digestible way. And I'd like to then pivot over to Ash. So with the context that Tyler set, what are you seeing on the ground through the JJK fan? So distilling all of this big opportunity, the millions of job opportunities that exist in this system, particularly needing to do it in a way that's equitable, inclusive, but also climate smart. How are you translating that to the people you're working with in East St. Louis?
Big question. So for those of you who do not know, the JJK FAN is the Jackie Joyner Kersey Food, Agriculture, Nutrition, Innovation Center in East St. Louis, long acronym there. And this is a partnership between the Donald Danforth Center, Jackie Joyner Kersey Foundation, and the University of Illinois Extension. And our goal at this center is to provide students in East St. Louis the opportunity to increase their STEM skills, particularly in regards to ag, plant science, and food. And so the Jackie Joyner Kersey Center currently functions as a K-2 academy, and then also an after-school program. So both the Donald Danforth Center as well as U of I have classes there after school that help students focus on their STEM skills and get to learn about the wide breadth of what agriculture could actually be. This is very important in East St. Louis, particularly because it is a food desert. And when you survey students often about agriculture, they will say, well, that doesn't pertain to me. I live in the city, who cares? And so we're trying to bridge the urban and the rural divide about how important agriculture can be. Specifically, we have a camp that we run over the summer through the USDA that is focused on bridging the urban and the rural divide between East St. Louis and also through students who live in Waterloo, Illinois. So in this particular program, students meet together. They get to meet students of different backgrounds, and they plant different varieties of corn and both locations, both in East St. Louis and at Babbler Farms, which is a farm out in Illinois. And so they get to compare not only the different varieties of corn, but also how climate affects the corn in the different locations. As we know, cities can be heat sinks, and this typically has an effect on the crop as well. So this sort of program is what we're really pushing. It's hands-on, it's investigative, and students get to learn from experts about what agriculture can look like in an urban area, what agriculture can look like in a rural area, and how at the end of the day, a lot of the challenges are the same in both locations. Both are suffering from loss of jobs in the area. Both are suffering from a lack of ag education in the area. And so, it's very interesting to watch these students get this hands-on experience and at the end realize that, one, the agriculture industry is in desperate need of new ideas and new people to come in and help, but also that they're kind of in the same boat no matter the difference of lifestyles.
Thanks so much, Ash. So just for my sake, how many of you are from the St. Louis metro area, or at least familiar with it? So, there's been our region has been well studied for decades now, particularly because of how structural racism and some of those structural barriers have led to economic decay and erosion. There's been some studies that if you go from, parts of our region that are really affluent, have a lot of access, and just go miles down the road to different zip code, the life expectancy changes. So the fact that they're able to connect communities from, urban Illinois, East St. Louis, a really disenfranchised community with a rural community in relatively somewhat close proximity, to see some of the commonalities, I think is really important as we're thinking about how to grow this sort of agriculture, food innovation community in an equitable and inclusive way. So moving from that, we've talked a little bit about, early childhood, K through 12 work, but what does this look like, Michael, with your background in higher education or some of the other contexts you're seeing in workforce development?
Absolutely. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thanks for sharing these insights. I've had an eclectic background. I've been in academia for several years, and now I work for government. And Ronald Reagan once said, I'm from government, so run, right? Basically. And so I'm here to tell you that, some of my comments today will either upset you or you'll be excited about them. And that's the beauty of talking to somebody from government is every day, I'm just going to get your driver's license. You'll find out what I'm talking about within that 2 hours that you're there. But the reality is we're doing things wrong. My grandfather in 1980s, when I graduated from high school, my grandfather said, Michael, don't you dare get a degree or a career in agriculture. Now, he made his entire living as a farmer. He was a very prosperous farmer, but he was in the 80s. And he said, don't you do it, because you know what? We do things stupid. That's what he used to tell me. We'd stand there at the fence row and he'd say, this is just stupid what we're doing now. And in the 1980s, we were pushing like crazy science on all of our farmers. And we lost sight of what we're pushing now: environment, natural resources, all the things that I know that as a farm kid growing up, I took hogs out into the field for a reason. I took them out there because we had a natural breakdown of the waste, and then we applied that product out there in the winter months, and it broke down, and it was natural. And then we took those away, and then we started putting synthetic or maybe some natural encapsulated nitrogen and so forth, right? But the reality is we just did things stupid in our industry. And we've got to stop and wake up and look at it very systemic. Tyler had a great slide up here, a big globe in a circle, and it had all the interconnected pieces. But what do we do in our academic institutions? We put you in departments and we myopically throw at you one view. You go into soil sciences, you talk about soils, but what about its connection to our animals? What about its connection to our plants? What about its connection to our life, right? Every day we talk about this, but we in our academic institutions don't promote that. We promote that you live in a silo, and then we don't connect those silos. We don't give you the opportunity to unload your grain from that silo and feed the animals out into the pasture. We say, go in there myopically and look at an issue. We're doing things stupid. We've got to get better at the way that we start to prepare a climate smart career force. We've got to start connecting them. So I'm going to say, Tyler said everything started like in the 1950s. I agree. The destruction of American agriculture started in the 1950s. But the reality is it also goes back to the 1800s. Somebody that I'm a scholar of is Jonathan Baldwin Turner. Jonathan Baldwin Turner, if any of you go to a land-grant university of any sort, a few of you did, all right. Hey, you should look at those for masters and PhDs. And so, no, I'm sorry. There was a great article. I can get a whole nother side note, but the reality is Jonathan Baldwin Turner is the father of the land-grant institutions. And he said that we need a practical and a liberal education in and about agriculture. Not just a practical, not just a STEM only, but if we want to connect with our young people, we've got to connect with them on who they are, not for what we want them to do. Who are they in their communities? Who are they in their lives? How many of our agriculturalists read Walt Whitman? You know, most of us don't. But yet Walt Whitman said we need to be connected to our nature and to appreciate and to value it. We've got to make sure that our agricultural researchers, our STEM folks, are connected to our literature folks, and our literature folks are connected to our scientists, because that's what life is about. Life is not myopic. Life is not a linear process. We are systemically connected, and we've got to find those connections if we're going to have a climate smart workforce. And that's how we need to start looking at these connections. So we'll circle back around to this, and I'll probably connect even more points. And I apologize again. I'm here to either piss you off or you're going to love me. So I'm from government. That's my job. So, but I'm excited about where we're going because I do see a lot of systemic efforts like what Tyler's group's doing. What we're seeing with our various small community organizations saying, we need to look at the food production and how we engage people, how we look at our startups that are starting to say there's an interconnectivity to what we do, what we're doing, seeing here at the Danforth Center as well. That's the direction we need to go. We got to continue to break it down. In order to do that, we got to dump it back out so we start getting all the pieces back together.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, and we'll stick with you for a little bit more, Michael. But so, you know, moving from sort of the educational and academic part of this quote unquote workforce system, what are the most in-demand jobs you're seeing? So there's sort of the workforce side of the system in your context at the Illinois Department of Agriculture.
Well, we have all sorts of careers within the Department of Ag and across the state. Right now, I'm in the process of hiring 40 people and trying to hire them to be conservation planners for the entire state. We are partnering with NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Services, to put 40 boots on the ground. A 2021 study found that over 90% of the respondents said the bottom line is we could get more conservation and more natural resource protection on the ground if we had people, but we don't have people. You know, we have a shortage across many workforce industries, but we in the ag industry need to do a little bit more systemic look at the way that we identify and connect to people. There are a lot of people out there that may find agriculture as an opportunity, but we've got to connect them maybe back through conservation. So trying to hire conservation planners is a challenge. A lot of people are not trained for it, but right now we're being rather holistic in the way that we're looking at it. We're looking at the low-hanging fruit, the people that most people say, well, you don't have a career in agriculture. Why? Because I don't want to move all over the country. I want to stay in my community. And so we're going after those folks and saying, we'll give you a nice high-paying job to stay in your community to put conservation practice on the ground. So that's one area. We also are having a tremendous amount of folks looking at livestock. And right now, sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the room is the hemp and cannabis industries. But I think there are partners also, because they can be a perennial product in some areas that can help to address some of the nutrient conservation issues across the state. Overall, though, we're seeing just a dearth of career opportunities associated with the agri-food industry in general. And I think a lot of that's because we haven't connected to people. Because I know when you go out and talk to people, my kids, I have 3 young kids, and every day they farm because they go out and they have farms in the community in our urban area. And when they talk about it, they don't talk about being farmers. They talk about producing food that they eat. And we've got to stop connecting people to say that you got to be a farmer to be part of agriculture. And I can tell you that you don't have to look like me, being a white 50-year-old man, to be in farming or be in agriculture. But we've got to break down the cycles. And the thing is we have to recognize that not all cultural groups look at it in the same way. The African-American community is going to be engaged differently than the Hispanic community. They're not all the same. Men and women, we are different. We do come from Venus and Mars and whatever planets, right? We are different. So we can't keep going at people and myopically saying, once again, let's use the golden rule, do unto others as you want done unto yourself. We've got to use that platinum rule. Do unto others what they want done unto themselves, right? What they want. And that's going to open up career opportunities for agriculture. There's a plethora of careers, but the question is how do we engage them into our community?
Great. And I think this is a great segue, kind of moving away from, you know, when we think about agriculture, it might be the principal operator's perspective, a grower specifically, but Mary has a really interesting perspective, particularly that's very familiar to those of us here in the St. Louis ag tech innovation ecosystem, how we're leveraging innovation and new processes and the great talent that we have here to sort of disrupt agriculture or advance it in some way. So Mary, I'd like to have you expand a little bit more on how you're seeing all of this conversation playing out at your company. What are the critical jobs for your continued growth, and maybe what, you know, to the point of the question, what are some of the jobs of the future that you're anticipating as well?
Thanks, Justin. I actually wear 2 hats. So one is my startup hat as president of Solus, and the other hat, you know, I'm also an executive in residence at BioGenerator, which is the venture capital arm of BioSTL. So we're an ecosystem builder. And as a result, I also think very broadly about the ecosystem in many ways. I love the presentation, Tyler, and you know, I wish you were my professor. I'm too old, but But yeah, so I would say, I also have the perspective of having spent over 2 decades at a large multinational ag company, which will not be named. So I've seen, what happens in industry, in the ag industry, if you will, from that perspective as well. And I can tell you, I don't have 40 jobs, but right now my company is trying so hard to fill 6 jobs. Okay, I have 6 postings out on Indeed. So if any one of you, and I'll tell you what they are.
Yeah.
One is for a director of R&D, so that's, a lab, managing people in the lab, doing science in the lab. Another one is research and development research and development managers to manage a greenhouse that's running R&D projects. And so there's a diversity of roles there. I think going forward, there's going to be, like you said, Tyler, a lot of demand for jobs in digital strategy and data analytics. I look at ChatGPT and I think, the world, we say, ADBC, it's AC and BC, but after ChatGPT and before ChatGPT, right? The world is changing. In another 10 years, everything will be automated, right? Whether you like it or not. And what we want to do is be ready for that, just as we want to be ready for the climate smart jobs of the future. And we'll talk about that too. But look at the jobs that, are going to go away. 100 years ago, there was a lot of demand for women to be sticking labels on soup cans, right? Well, automation happened very quickly and, those jobs are gone. Just like, would love to have a gas station attendant full service, but that doesn't happen anymore. So look at those jobs that are going to go, those ones that are going to be easily automated. And we need to make sure that our children and our, employees are digitally advanced and they have those skills. That's going to be very important. But you just can't not only have that, because like you said, there's this other part of nature and there's things that robots can do. There's human aspects to that, right? And so we don't have enough plant breeders and botanists, whoever learns botany in school anymore. I did, but I don't think anyone else does. We have jobs for a plant physiologist. I'll tell you, it's very hard to fill those jobs. Agronomists, it's not about looking at it as agriculture versus, like you said, it's holistic, and we just need to have all of these skills and ensure that people know there are great jobs out there, very fulfilling jobs that you can, if this is an area of interest for you, right? Agriculture is not just about farming. We have such a variety of jobs in agriculture. Unfortunately, most of the money from venture capital ends up going into pharma because everyone wants to solve cancer and yes, but if you don't have food, I don't care. The big thing is that the rest of the world understands the importance of food. I bet you there's families in Ukraine that understand the importance of food right now. And that's the breadbasket of the world. Okay. And we're all suffering because of that war. There are farmers and there's places in Africa that people don't have food. We've been lucky, our farmers are so productive that we don't have to worry about food, but that's not the case for the rest of the world. And I don't think we'll ever have that focus on agriculture as long as we have the food security that we have. But we're just one pandemic away from having the same situation, or one plant pandemic away whenever that happens with the monocultures we have, right? So I think we need to be thinking about, again, from the financial sector side, how do we reinvest money in those spaces as well, in agriculture, taking that more seriously. So, as the Farm Bill comes this year, how do we make sure that governments are thinking more critically about jobs in that sector, in the farm sector, as being important for biosecurity, food security. There's a lot of jobs there. There's jobs in the regulatory space now. we all don't like government and we wish that regulation could go away, but like it or not, it's with us. So, but there's a lot of jobs there, that people aren't aware of, and I haven't even touched on STEM, right? And there's so much happening with technologies that are not digital or not data analytics. Gene editing, for example, everyone's talking about how gene editing will solve, diseases. Yes, and it will, but it's going to be big for plants as well. We have the opportunity now, and just even in my company, we are helping other companies create new varieties of plants that will capture more carbon, microbes that will capture more carbon, sequester the carbon, or actually deal with the effects of climate change here and now. Whether we like it or not, we're in the midst of climate change. And, how do you make more climate resilient varieties? There's one way of engineering all of that, but there's another way, which is just look at biodiversity. We're losing species like crazy. You spoke about conservation. We don't necessarily have to have a monoculture. Now, we have cover crops and all these cover crops that come in and everybody's like, oh, wow, you have a cover crop. But that's what people did all the time. You had soy corn and you had alfalfa and you had something else and something else. And so historically, our farmers knew that you needed to have diversity in the field. We went away from that and now we're like reinventing it all over again, right? But so there's a lot of, the climate has a lot of negative effects now because of climate change. We're losing biodiversity, which is important. We need to, I talk a lot about capturing what we are losing in the moment. 40% of our biodiversity is being lost as we speak. Do you know that I think it's like 5 or 6 crops that feed like 60 to 90% of the world right now, just 5 or 6 crops. Imagine if there was like a pandemic for crops, where 1 or 2 of those crops, we're one of those away from disaster, right? So we need to have more crops, more diversity in our fields, more diversity in our food systems, have children educated about that. They ought not to think that, chicken nuggets come from, they look like, that's what chickens look like. Or, I actually have a nephew, a little fellow that thinks, only it's chicken nuggets and he thinks that's what chickens are. But he lives in Boston too. So yes, it comes from the grocery store, and don't have an idea of like, what does a wheat plant look like or rice look like, So I think it gets back to education, but it also gets back to us being more savvy about the world and about the loss and about climate and how government and private sector and other arms can work together. So these alliances that you're talking about are so important. Recently, just because I have nothing else to do in my spare time, I wrote a paper about, we you can look it up. If you Google me, I suppose you could find it. We have the Human Genome Project, right? We had that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I worked at a big company and we were so excited because we had the first plant genome sequenced. What was it? It was Arabidopsis, which is a tiny little weed. And we're like, wow, this is so great. Now, 20 years later, we still don't have all of the plants sequenced. And of course, plants are more diverse than humans. It's just one species. But there's so much information there. I look at it from a STEM perspective, and my background is in molecular biology and genetics, but there's so much information we're losing. There's biodiversity we're losing. How do we connect the germplasm with the genetic information and build new sectors of knowledge and industry, right? We talk about the bioeconomy all the time, like now it's a big buzzword, but it's really about plants, and plants underlie our food, our, fiber, the buildings we live in, the clothes that we wear, and we just ignore plants and even the medicines, we talked about fungi. Did you know that, the statins came from fungi? Pharma re-engineers things synthetically, but almost everything has a biological background, right? In provenance. So I think going back to that, there's a lot of space for education in that space, but also careers in those spaces of conservation and biodiversity and genome sequencing and learning about genomes and, just so much to do. It's not just about, we grow corn and that's what agriculture is about. So.
Thanks, Mary. I really do want to, before I open up to the rest of the room here, I did want to double click on something, particularly, let it be known, Mary has coming from a storied career in big agriculture, driving a lot of innovations, but we're seeing, particularly as you mentioned, VC, increased investment of venture capital into agriculture tech innovation, this sort of ecosystem. We've seen steady growth in VC dollars flowing into ag tech startups. So I know we kind of think about, roles with government, roles in industry, but can you talk a little bit more about entrepreneurship in this space?
Love to talk about that. So, I think, so I told you I spent over 20 years in big ag, but I always had this entrepreneurial mindset. I wanted to start my own company. And in the pandemic, I think, there was this big, what people talk about.
The great resignation.
The great resignation. I think about it as the great, rethinking or, and so I was like, okay, I should go do what, I wanted to do and to begin with. And so I started this company with a couple of my co-founders and, it's been doing really well. But I wanted to have a different kind of company. Everyone can start a product company and, say, oh, we want to get this new trait out. But being in big ag, I knew that there are so many things and tools and technologies that big agricultural companies have, and there's only 4 or 5 of them, okay? But they control everything that others don't have. And we wanted to democratize that and lower the barrier to entry for startups and any innovator that had an idea about, creating a climate resilient plant or some idea around improving, plant biology or the environment or whatever. And so we created the first one of a kind company that's a services company. So we're like, we will build the tools and technologies and the platforms that anybody can come and access just on a fee for service basis. So we don't take anyone's IP or intellectual property. If they would go to a big company, if they could even get into the door before they would even help them, they would say, sign these papers and give us your IP, before we, and or royalty share before we'll let you do anything or give you any money. So we wanted to change that paradigm and say, we will develop our own tools and technologies and they're comparable to what you would have, come to us and, you can do stuff so much faster. And you can compete with the big guys, or you can license your technologies much faster to the big guys, or, you can, build new, data streams and new value streams of products, right? You could have new products. It could be a new crop. It could be a new technology, whatever it is. And so that's taken off really well. And we have lots of clients from all over the world, really coming to, they didn't even know what St. Louis, where's St. Louis? They're like, where is that? And then I would say Chicago. And then they're like, oh, okay, near Chicago. Okay. But we want St. Louis also to be known for St. Louis, not just for its proximity to Chicago. So we have clients from across the world coming to us. And I think there's so many jobs there in the startup space. We want anybody that wants to start a company to be able to start a company, and in the ag space, we'll help you. Yeah. So that's another area of space. And thanks for reminding me about that. I didn't even think about that. I do it in my day job. Yeah. And then we also want to bring that knowledge to the students in the lab. So actually, we do a lot of outreach. I used to be a science fellow at my other company, and we would go out and And, even comes to Danforth Center and we'd have these outreach activities for kids. But what they get there is so small and, very focused and narrow. They really need that broader perspective. And there's nothing as good as seeing your parents and your family members really, engaged in productive activities that involve plants, okay, or the climate, or, nature. And that, I think, is the most important for kids to see, not just to experience it, outside of their day-to-day life.
Thanks. So obviously there's a wealth of knowledge here on this panel. So I'll invite folks with questions that you might have for either individual panelists or all of us, and happy to take a few moments to just really make sure that we're providing you the information that you want to hear. I know some, yeah. And I know some names, so if we don't wait, I will call some people that I know their names and see what questions you have. The microphone is right here.
Justin, if you don't mind, I'd like to
Yeah.
respond to something Mary shared. So one thing I want to add on there is and this is going to be one of those things that, again, I'm here from the government, and either upset you or I'm going to make you happy. Agriculture, and I'm going to make a declaration here, agriculture is sexy again.
Yeah.
It is exciting to be part of something that life is going to be looking to for solutions. Today is International Humble Day. Agriculture is never to be humble. We are to be out front and reminding people. I used to tell my students every single day in my classes, agriculture, or our food, is killing us. We know that CDC said, look to the right and look to the left, that your generation is going to have a shorter lifespan than my generation. That should scare you. That should wake you up and say, agriculture is the opportunity, because the food is your solution. And the way that we take care of our environment and our nature and everything that goes to support that is the solution. And so agriculture is sexy again. Being in the Midwest is even sexier, because I can tell you, with climate change, people are moving here. And Chicago is soon to be the new New York and the LA. It is going to be the hub of this nation. Now, I won't see it in my lifespan, but my children will. St. Louis will become the next second hub of this nation, because people are going to move to the Midwest. The question is, are we ready for it with the smart climate strategies, with the smart climate workforce and the tactics and the philosophies? Let's go back to our education system, and we teach the 3 R's, and I think they're important. I'm not saying they're not, but agriculture should be at the foundation of every child's development, from the point they're in the womb and to the point that we die. And we need to make sure that people understand it. Don't be humble today. Be out there and tell them agriculture is sexy and exciting, and the Midwest is even on the forefront of that.
Thank you. Oh, Angie, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Hello, panel. You guys are doing an amazing job. I'm very inspired. Oh my goodness, agriculture is sexy. So my question to you is this, you're speaking to the choir. We are all like, yes, we agree. But how do we use policy to make our state and our nation realize that climate is important, food is important? We should have a Super Bowl that's about farmers and not just about our football teams. So that's my question.
I'll definitely jump in on when it comes to policy. And I think it starts back with discourse. As a social scientist, I can tell you that I used to work for the National Food Safety and Toxicology Center. And I'd go into the meeting with a group of STEM scientists, and I would say, oh, thank you, you brought a hard scientist to the room. And they'd all look at me and say, what? No, we've been taught that the hard sciences are the bench scientists and the microbiologists and all these other, and I'm like, you are right. You are dealing with some hard stuff. I can tell you, throwing things in a petri dish is hard, but dealing with people is even harder. And people are our problem right now. When you look at this nation, the discourse levels that we have, it comes down to, we have not advanced the importance of our social sciences. And those social sciences are what's going to break down the policy, because the policy should come from us, we the people, but it will only come if we're engaged. If we're disengaged, we get what we now have. We have a very disengaged society, and they only want to activate when somebody's made their neighborhood problem. But we need to be engaged every day on every issue that comes to our life. And our life is our food supply, and we should be active. And again, we want to talk about climate smart. Illinois, we're one of the leading states in the nation when it comes to sales of agricultural commodities. We have 1.7+ million people working in the ag workforce, yet we import over 90% of our food. That's a problem. That's a real problem that we're not climate smart. Our global footprint is a problem. We need to bring that food production back home. We need to be smart when we're thinking about our purchases. We all like to have grapes and strawberries and raspberries every day of the year. We've got to get back to a point when we start eating what we grow, not trying to bring in everything what we eat, right? And so we've got to think. So policy will come from engaged people with strong discourse and engaging their elected officials. We have an amazing group of elected officials that need to listen to us, we the people. And that only happens if we educate them about the importance of it, knowing that chicken nuggets don't come from McDonald's. They come from the farm down the street that has LMF issues. We have nutrient issues and those kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you. So, if you have notes or questions, please write them on your Post-its, post them on our whiteboard here. We're gonna take a really short 3 or 4 minute break so you can stand up, take a bio break, refill your coffee, and we're gonna start our more dynamic facilitated part of the workshop. And we can use some of your notes and questions to help frame that portion of the conversation. So if bring your comments and put them here and we'll read them while you are refilling your coffee. Thank you. And thank you to our panel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.